Hello guys, so in this video we will talk about binding modes in WPF. We have four modes: one time, one way to source and two way. We will talk about these binding modes one by one in detail, but before that let's understand what is binding in WPF. So binding in WPF requires two things. The first is source and the second is target. Now the source can be a normal CLR property or it can be a dependency property, but the target must be a dependency property. And then finally what we bind is the data which is there under these properties. Now if you're wondering what is dependency property, then let me give you a brief about it because it's very important concept in WPF. Let's come back to Visual Studio, and I have a class, and if I'll tell you how do you write a normal property, then you will say that prop full and then tab. This is how I write a property. Here my property is a wrapper which wraps this my_var member variable. Now a dependency property in WPF is written like prop tp then tab. Here my property is a dependency property, but this time the CLR property my property is wrapping that dependency property my property, as you can see from here. So getting and setting on this property will give you the dependency property. Now all those important concepts which is there in WPF, like binding, like style, like data template, like control template, all these things are possible because of this dependency property only. You can see here that quickly, this is because any class where you are writing a dependency property must inherit from dependency object. Okay, because get value and set value is coming out from the dependency object class only. Okay, now let's remove this, and let's remove this also because this was just for understanding. Now all those standard controls that you see in WPF, if I'll talk about text box, label, button, and let's take text box for an example, and you have this text property. If you navigate to this property, then you can see that this text property is a normal CLR property, but this property wraps the text property dependency property. And also this text box class, if you'll keep on navigating to the parent, then you can see that this is inheriting from dependency object class also. As I said, that it is mandatory that your class must inherit from dependency object. Okay, now let's come back to the slide and let's talk about the modes now one by one. Now the first mode is the one-time mode. In one-time mode, we are updating the target from the source, but only one time. Later on, if you'll run the application, then updating the source will not update the target. Okay, let's see how you can see here. If the source is having a data, then it will update the target the moment you run the application. But later, if you update the source again with data 1, the target will not be updated. Let's come back to Visual Studio to see this in action. I have this text box, as you can see this from the visual, and I have this slider. I want to bind slider's value property. Let's give value initial value first. That give me 3. I want to bind this value property to the text of the text box. Okay, so how to do so? Let me give the name to a slider, and then let me bind the text property. So use binding markup extension, then element name, slider, and then you need to give the path to which property you want to bind to. I want to bind the value property, and then mode. Okay, you can see here there are 4 modes and there is one extra mode default. We'll talk about this at the very last point of this video, but let's concentrate on for the one-time mode. Let's write one time. So here my source is this value and target is the text property. So initial value is 3. It will update the target when I run the application, and later on my source, changing the source, will not update the target. Let's run this and see this in action. Okay, so yeah, you can see here 3 is there in the text box. Let's move the source. It is not updating the target. And target, if you'll update anything, it will not have any influence on the source. Okay, now let's come back to the slide again and let's see another mode. The next mode is way mode. Again, you can see from the arrow that here also the source is updating the target, but every time you are updating the source, the target will be updated. As you can see that the source is having a data, target will update it. You change the source to data 1, again the target will be updated to data 1. This is how it works. But target has again no influence on source. Changing target will not be having any impact on source. Let's come back to Visual Studio again to see this in action. Okay, now this time let's change this to one way and then run again to see this in action. Here I am moving my slider and you can see here the target is getting updated. If you change the target, there will not be having any impact on source. So source is updating the target. Okay, so let's come back to the slide and let's see the next mode. The next mode is one way to source. As you can see this from the arrow again, here target is updating the source. Every time you update the target, the source will be updated. But updating the source will not have any impact on target. Let's come back to Visual Studio to see this in action. Let's try here, right here, one way to source, and then let's remove this. I don't need this now. Let's keep it at default value, which is 0 for slider. Okay, now let's write something here 5. You see it got updated. Now let's write something here 9. It is updated. Now you change the source, the target has no impact. But you write here something like 3, it is updating. So target is updating the source in one way to source. Okay, now let's come back to the slide again and let's talk about yeah, you can also see from this animation that target is having data, then source is also having the data. Now target is changed to data 1, the source again updates himself to data 1. Okay, now let's come back to the last mode, which is two-way mode. Now as the name suggests, the source is having the data, then it will update the target. If target is having the data, then it will update the source. So it is two-way. Let's come back to the slide to see this in action, and let's change this to two-way, and then let's run it to see this in action. Let's write something here 6 and then tab. Let's yeah, move the slider. You can see here, so source and target are updating themselves. As I said, I will be talking about this default mode in very last. So this default mode, okay, so the text property of text box is having a default mode which is two-way, binding two-way. If I'll run this now, then you can see that I'll change here, write something here 5, then it is updating the source, change the slider, it is updating the target. Okay, and if you are wondering why it is default, then again this is because of dependency property, and we can just set the metadata when we are writing a dependency property. As I said, we can write a dependency property like this, and then you have this property metadata. You can also have a framework property metadata, and if I'll navigate to this class, then there are there are lots of constructors, and I have also this framework property metadata options in one of the constructor. If I navigate here, I can see here binds two-way by default. So when the text property was written, dependency property was written for the text box, then the default mode was set there only. They wrote like that only. Okay, now let's come back to the slide. So with this, we are finished with this, and I think you have understood all those concepts. One thing that if you have liked this video, then please do not forget to subscribe and like, because I have made a very hard work to make you understand these concepts through these slides and presentation. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye bye.